Hello world, my name is Leo and today we are discussing the game Ravenlok, and man, it is hard to know where to begin with this one. So whenever I discuss or feature games on the channel, I always think it's very important to showcase both the good and the bad experiences. And the reason for that is that the bad experiences not only can be fun to talk about, but they also make for interesting discussion when it comes to comparing what makes good games good and what makes bad games bad. But I don't think I've ever played a game, at least not in recent memory, as offensively bad as Ravenlok is. This game is so boring, so half-baked, that I could only play a little over an hour of it before I was done. I could not continue any longer. So I guess I'll just kind of do what I did with Starfield. I'll go through my experience, stopping to talk about mechanics here and there. Just like with that one, I have some notes in front of me, but for the most part, this is going to be unscripted. So here we go. So the game starts off with you being able to name your character. We will come back to that. The game will make that unimportant later. You're starting out on this farm. You play as your character that you named. In my case, I named her Lena, but we'll just call her Ravenlok for the rest of the video. You start out on a farm. Ravenlok's family just moved there, and it's here that you'll almost immediately notice two things. The first is probably the only compliment I can give the game, and that is the art style. It's actually a really interesting style that takes advantage of voxel, like pixel art. The result is like everything looks blocky, but it all looks colorful, it all looks detailed, the lighting is really good. This is honestly some really masterful voxel art that we have. And like for some of the grounds and stuff like that, it almost looks like voxel art with like a texture layered over on top of it. It looks really cool, and I commend the game for having a style as unique as this. However, the second thing that you will notice is when the game introduces its main mechanic, fetch quests. This game is absolutely littered with fetch quests. It is the main thing that you will be doing throughout the entire game. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds mind-numbingly boring. And it's not that. It's worse. So, you have this checklist that usually appears whenever you get a new quest, and there is an option in the options menu to auto-hide that checklist, and I recommend that you do that, because if you don't do that, the checklist will just stay there, taking up like a good quarter of your screen for the entire game, because you will never run out of fetch quests and you will never run out of checklists. The fact that an auto hide option exists implies the existence of a manual hide, but the game doesn't tell you what button that is, and I could not find it, so I'm assuming that it doesn't exist. And if you don't auto hide it, you will just be stuck with that checklist on your screen the entire time. Also, you cannot do your checklists in any order if it is a multi-step fetch quest. For example, in this beginning checklist, you'll see that I have a quest to like help Dad with his toolbox. The toolbox is right here in the truck right next to him, but I cannot interact with the toolbox until I complete the other two things on the checklist above it. So you cannot complete these quests in any order. You do need to make sure that each dialogue is triggered and stuff before you get to be able to do the thing that you want to do, even if the solution is right there. So you go through a few of these checklists, helping your parents get settled in your guys' new home. You go into this barn, you go through a mirror, and you end up in this game's version of Wonderland, which is Dunia. This game is trying to emulate a Alice in Wonderland style and an Alice in Wonderland story. Basically, there's an evil queen who has cursed the land, and Ravenlok, as she is called, is a prophecy of someone with raven hair who comes through a portal and is supposed to rid the world of this curse. Quick side note, the reason why I said the name would become unimportant later is because there's only one line in the game that I found at least, that actually uses the name that I gave my character, and that is from the parents in the prologue section. Any other time the character introduces herself or other NPCs talk about my character, they refer to her as Ravenlok, and my character refers to herself as Ravenlok. So naming your character is pointless. I don't know if it carries out through the whole game, granted. They could use my character's name, in my case Lena, further on in the game, but I do not care to get that far to find out. So right now I'm just going to assume that the name I put in is never used again. Now, back to the Alice in Wonderland setting and story. The Alice in Wonderland, or Alice Through the Looking Glass, is an iconic story, and the thing that makes it iconic, in part, are the colorful cast of characters. In every iteration of this story, Alice comes across an eccentric cast. The world is incredibly strange. There's impossible architecture, there's shrinking and growing, there's the Mad Hatter and the Cheshire Cat and the White Rabbit, all of whom have very striking personalities. There's almost a mystery to them. Are they threatening? Are they friendly? There's a level of madness to it. There's no consistency or groundedness to latch onto. It's all just a little bit off, a little bit crazy. So this game is trying to emulate an Alice in Wonderland setting and story, and the setting is okay. It's colorful and it's detailed, and there's a castle, and there's a room with masks on the wall. A lot of the NPCs are animals. That's about as far as the Alice in Wonderland influence goes, because I would say this game commits the cardinal sin of not giving its characters any personality whatsoever. And I mean that. I would say 10% of the characters have barely have a personality that you can barely care about. 90% of these characters don't have any personality whatsoever and purely exist to give your character, Ravenlok, fetch quests. I met someone who I think is supposed to be the Cheshire Cat, but instead we just have Nestor the cat, who just gives exposition about the next area in the game that I'm supposed to visit in the second act. And the fact that I'm not certain that it's supposed to be the Cheshire Cat really speaks to how poorly they did these characters justice. I also met someone who I know is supposed to be the White Rabbit, but instead we just have Finn, who entire purpose is to explain to you the Ravenlok prophecy and then send you on a quest to find your sword and shield so that you can begin the combat tutorial. Speaking of combat, this is how sword combat looks and sounds in Ravenlok. So yeah, it is just as basic as it looks. Mashing the square button will just have Ravenlok swing her sword infinitely. You do have a spell that's on a cooldown with the promise of other abilities that'll be attached to like the bumpers and triggers that you get later on as you progress through the game. It's not particularly interesting, but it does vary up the gameplay. And you also have consumables mapped to the down arrow, such as health, well, not such as, that are health potions and bombs. It seems to be a very basic attempt at a Souls-like style of combat with sword, spells, and consumables. And like, it's there, it's incredibly basic. It's not good, but I don't know if I can say it's necessarily bad. It gets the job done. It's just there. Take that as you will. So all of the enemies that I'm going through up to this point are blazingly easy. To give some more context, I'm in this mushroom forest. I'm trying to help these hedgehogs fix their cart, and in order to fix their cart, they need me to get a blessing from this witch. And so I arrive at this witch, and she tells me that in order to get the blessing, I need ingredients, and one of the ingredients can be found with this mushroom boss. So I fight my way through a couple of rooms, I get to the mushroom boss, and here is what happens. Watch my health as I get hit. The boss almost one-shots me. And that green bar, by the way, is my block. So the fact that it went down means that I successfully blocked the attack, and it still almost one-shot me. If I don't block, it does one-shot me. So I go through this boss fight a few times, and I'm like, what is going on? I try to like switch from normal to easy and easy back to normal to see if there's any difference, and there doesn't seem to be any. In easy mode, the boss one-shots me, or the boss two-shots me instead of one-shots me if I don't block. And I'm also noticing that my spells and my sword are hardly doing any damage. Like, when I first got the sword, Ravenlok said it was brimming with magical power, but in this boss fight, I am hitting a boulder with a toothpick, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I go through this a few times. I find this really weird bug where if I pause the game while she's moving, sometimes her hair will come off her head, which is weird. And I eventually come to the conclusion that it almost feels like I'm underleveled for this fight. Like I'm definitely missing something. But the game hadn't said anything about leveling up to this point at all. Like, there is a screen in the pause menu that has stats and says that I'm level 1, but the game never told me how to increase my level, nor did it give any indication that I was going to be underleveled going into this fight, because all of the like minions prior to this boss were just nothing. So I go back and I try to find if there's an NPC that I missed, and eventually I have to look it up, and turns out I did miss an NPC. This tiny mouse sitting in this like shack thing is apparently the NPC that I'm supposed to visit to level up. and I had missed him entirely because he's next to a cauldron with an eye, so naturally I was drawn to him instead of this, like, stall. And I go to him, and he asks for shinies, and he doesn't even introduce himself, he just asks for shinies, and which is weird because the icon for XP is a feather. Speaking of the XP, I hadn't realized that I was collecting a secondary currency up to this point, because I had only thought I was collecting gold, because the XP gathers in a different part of the screen than where the gold gathers, and it gathers while I'm hitting enemies instead of after the fact. So, like, maybe that's on me. Maybe that's just, like, streamer blindness, that I did not see that I was collecting XP. But I find out that I can level myself up to level 6 already with what I've gathered. So I level myself up to level 6, I go back to the boss, and all of a sudden, it's like a normal boss fight. If anything, I'm just slightly overpowered for this fight now. So what that means is that this game expects you to grind for levels without telling you that you need to level up at all. And as a result, it feels incredibly tacked on for this type of game. Like, imagine if I had only gotten enough, like, I had only gotten up to level 6, I'm guessing, because I had fought a group of like 4 waves of mushrooms beforehand, and then spent like every death, like 6 or 7 deaths, going through the rooms killing a bunch of enemies again. So like, imagine if I had only gotten enough XP to like level up to level 3. Would the boss fight still have been hard? Or like, was I supposed to level up immediately after defeating those waves in that like gauntlet thing? Like, did it give me enough XP to be able to make the boss fight a normal fight? But if that's the case, why wouldn't you just get rid of the leveling system entirely and just scale all of the bosses the same to make it an actually interesting fight, instead of putting this... I can only assume it's for padding. Like, I can only assume that the reason why this leveling system exists is to pad the game. Otherwise, why would they make the boss fights as hard as they are if they didn't want you to like grind to make the game longer? I don't know. So I defeat that boss and I bring the ingredient back to the witch, and she sends me to get another ingredient from another boss. So I go to that area, and in this area there's a bunch of enemies, and there's these 4 deer, and each one of them give me a quest to kill a certain number of enemies, of enemy types in this room. And so I go through and do all of that, and by the time I've killed all of the enemies in the room, I still have 2 quests that are incomplete. So either this quest was bugged, and it didn't register some of the enemies that I had killed before getting the quest, or there weren't enough enemy spawns in this room to be able to complete the quests in one go. And this is the only room that these enemy types spawn in. So in order to complete these quests, I had to leave the room and come back in order to make the enemies respawn. And then once I collected the object from these 4 deer, I went to a 5th deer, and he let me into the boss fight, and it's this like bison who was once their protector, and the game tries to introduce some kind of theme here where like, oh, there's 2 sides to every story, because the deer imprisoned him, he believes wrongfully, because they were trying to protect him, or he was trying to protect them, and it was a misunderstanding, or something along those lines. And I'm like, why is this here? This game barely has a story. Now is not the time to be introducing half-baked themes. So I defeat this bison. Here's some footage of that because I gave up at this point. And I get the item, I go back to the witch. And now this is the final part of my experience, and this like perfectly encapsulates everything I've said up to this point. So I'm committed to at least playing up to here because I want to be able to fix the hedgehog's shop, because I'm wondering, okay, maybe whatever they sell me will be interesting. Maybe it's some kind of other consumable that'll make the game more interesting. So I at least want to see what happens when I repair this shop. So I go in and I start brewing this blessing in a cauldron, and there's an individual prompt to put each ingredient in the cauldron, because if there's one thing that this game is good at, it's shaving seconds off of your life. So I put all the ingredients in, and then Ravenlok says that the fire is not lit. And in order to light the fire, I have to go back outside, get a torch from the cauldron, and then come back into the house and light the fire. So I'm like, of course it has me do that. And at the same time, are you kidding me? So I do that, and I light the cauldron on fire, and I get the blessing. And I'm like, okay, I can head back to the hedgehogs. I can see if all of this was worth it. I go outside, and the game crashes. And this was not the only technical issue I had, by the way. I had previously started playing this, but I forgot to hit record. So I went to exit out of the game, and the game said it was exiting, but it actually didn't exit. It got stuck at this screen for 5 minutes until I Alt F4'd. So, yeah. The game crashed, and I was like, yeah, that seems about par for the course. So I went to bed, and I reflected on my experience, and I woke up and I uninstalled. So yeah, that was my experience with Ravenlok. I would say it is a good case of style over substance, but here, there is no substance at all. This game is nothing other than its art style. And I have never had a game waste my time and offend me as much as Ravenlok has. Maybe it gets better. I doubt it. But yeah, I've experienced enough of it. I'm good. Wouldn't recommend anyone else try it. Thank you for watching this discussion / review kind of Ravenlok. Please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I am very much looking forward to hearing any opinions that you guys have. Please also feel free to give me feedback on the review. Any constructive criticism is welcome. And yeah, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and I will see you guys next time in whatever video you guys choose to see me in next. Let's play, review, discussion, whatever. Goodbye!